Welcome to video 19, Motivation Part 2. So now we're going to talk about the work of a guy named Frederick Hertzberg, where he talks about something that's called the two-factor theory of job satisfaction or motivation. So he asked the following two questions of 2,000 accountants and engineers. Describe a time when you were extremely satisfied or turned on by your job. You might try to answer that yourself. Secondly, describe a time when you were extremely dissatisfied or turned off by your job. So now we're going to listen to George Labovitz talk about Maslow a little bit and then go on to explain Hertzberg.
In our previous session, we introduced Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs concept. And I tried to point out at that time that the Maslow concept is a theory of human behavior. It applies to our children. It applies to our employees. It applies to management. And it applies to marriage. For example, a few years ago, my wife did something to me that I discovered since that wives do all the time to husbands, and I gather the husbands do to wives as well. I had a very tough day. I wanted to be left alone. I came home and I dragged myself home and I think I opened a can of beer and I plopped down quietly. My wife was waiting for me. She sat down beside me holding a woman's magazine. And she had a pencil in her hand and she said, "George, answer these questions." Now, I didn't know if that test was, is your husband a good lover? I was afraid to answer A or B. It turned out that it was a test related to our marriage. She was holding a woman's article, an article in a woman's magazine that said, "Why Good Marriages Fail," was the lead of the article. It was an excellent article. It was an excellent application of Maslow to marriage. The author never mentioned Maslow. But said some very interesting things. He or she argued that good marriages fail because they're too good. They were demanding too much out of marriage today. The author went on to say something like, marriage, after all, was never meant to be as good as it is. It was instituted in the beginning to ensure survival, then convenience, then security. And now, today, the author said, we expect other things out of marriage, like great sexual pleasure, warm, romantic, and intimate moments, intellectual companionship. Maybe marriage is too good. Maybe the institution, which justifies divorce on the basis of low-level needs, i.e., desertion, adultery, beating, is now gone above that to the point where the frustrations that come when the higher-level needs aren't met are equally profound, even more profound than something low-level like not enough money. Look at the divorces amongst your friends, said the author. Look at perhaps your own divorce. And chances are your friends, the people you know, will say things like, he won't let me be me. I'm not myself. Those are high-level kinds of complaints. I'm reminded about a nuclear family. My grandfather was living with us at the time, and the first girl I ever brought home, I was 20 years old, she was 18. I brought home only because I was passing by on a date and I had to pick up something in my house. My family was sitting on our front stoop on a hot summer's night, and I introduced this young lady and said hi to everybody. They had a cup of coffee, and I took her back to her dorm. When I came home that night, it was about 1:30 in the morning. My family was asleep, everyone except my grandfather. And my grandfather said, is she the one? Are you going to marry her? And I said, marry her? 18-year-old girl, I don't love her. And he was astounded. He said, love? What's love? She's big, she's strong, she's got good teeth. Why not marry her? All he wanted out of marriage was something down here. That's the standard that he usually picked out my grandmother 50 years before. And had 50 years of hell, by the way. Now, this is Maslow at work. Maslow applies to all aspects of human behavior. Let's take a look at some of the dynamics of what happens to Maslow when we start to apply it a little bit to the people we manage. For example, I know a police chief that I did some work with once who was complaining to me about his young police officers. And he said, they aren't dedicated the way we were, the way when I was a young recruit. And I said, look, what's wrong with them? He said, they're lousy police officers. And I said, what do you mean they're lousy? And he went on to just give an example. He said, look, I ordered them long blue coats for the wintertime. And they refuse to wear them. They want short blue coats. They aren't dedicated the way I was. They don't take orders the way I do. And I said, wait a minute. Are these potentially good police officers? Why did you hire them in the beginning? He said, I hired them because they were half of them are college graduates because they're all Vietnam veterans, because they're bigger, stronger, and healthier than I was when I was their age. And I said, why then do you insist on managing them in exactly the same way that you were managed 25 years ago? And we didn't have an answer. Well, prior to turning on this unit, you were asked to answer two simple questions. These are the questions that Frederick Herzberg, very well-known psychologist, asked in the early 50s of a bunch of accountants and engineers in an attempt to find an answer, perhaps, to the dilemma of people like my police chief. The responses that Herzberg got were considered revolutionary, because here's what he found. The responses seemed to fall into two separate camps. Hence, Herzberg's theory is often called the two-factor theory of job satisfaction. In response to the first question, what do you like about your job? What kinds of things turn you on and excite you? People tended to say things like achievement, recognition, the work itself, responsibility. In response to the second question, what turns you off, what angers you, what frustrates you occasionally about your work, people tended to say something somewhat different, like policies, the supervision, bosses, lack of cooperation, poor benefits and pay, working conditions. Now, it was obvious then he was talking about two separate things. He labeled the things that turn people off hygiene factors. He borrowed the term from medicine. There's a man out there that hasn't had a 7th grade hygiene course. In my junior high school, it was taught by the gym teacher, didn't know any more hygiene than we did. Got all the kids together and he said, all right, you guys, if you don't wash your hands, you're going to get syphilis and beriberi. And we said, right, coach. Well, the point at least is obvious. If you don't take care of these things, watch out. You're in trouble. But for most of us in organizational life, we recognize this right away. There's an absolute minimum that we expect out of our job in terms of pay, benefits, and so on. Herzberg labeled the things that turn people on motivators. If we take care of the hygiene factors, we are only guaranteeing we're bringing everybody up to neutral. We are not necessarily guaranteeing that we are really turning them on. So then it is not hygiene factors that we're going to deal with in motivational dynamics. It's motivators. This kind of thing is easy to take care of. All you got to do is throw money at them. Benefits, pay. These kinds of things require very significant and sophisticated management techniques. How do we motivate people in organizational life today? We give them hygiene factors. We give them Blue Cross plans. We give them vacation schedules. We give them bowling leagues. We give them insurance policies. We give them things they can use after work when they're on vacation or when they're dead. Rarely do we try to work at giving them those higher level, motivating kinds of things. If we overlap Maslow over the Herzberg thing, we begin to see something right away. That it's very obvious that the hygiene factors relate to primary needs. That the motivators relate to higher level kinds of needs, psychological kinds of rewards that people are seeking out of their work today. Why do you think, for example, tomorrow morning, or after you've been away from the shop for a little while, you'll be standing probably in your bathroom, shaving or putting on makeup or combing your hair, and while you're shaving or putting on makeup or combing your hair, you're going to be motivated. You'll probably be thinking, I got to get to the office, I got meetings, I got things to do. While your body is in the bathroom, your mind is already opening up the mail. Why do you think that the people who work for you are also going to be in their bathrooms, also putting on makeup or shaving, only they may be saying something like, oh, God, it's Tuesday. Or worse, she's coming back today. Are you so much more moral than they are? Is God on your side? Maybe. But for most of us, I would argue you've got something going for you that they don't have going for them. You've got responsibility. You're the boss. Who parcels out all of this stuff? You do. Who controls it and uses it to motivate, consciously or not? You do. The ultimate power and the ultimate weapon of a manager is the fact that you are the source of the motivators. We all come to work to get some of this stuff. Now, the only problem is...
We aren't going to talk about the only problem. He said the only problem is different people have different ideas of what is rewarding. But let's look at Herzberg's theory again. The things that are motivators that turn people on. Achievement, being recognized for your achievements at work. And so it's just getting things done, getting recognition, the work itself, you love what you do, responsibility, chances for advancement and growth, and autonomy, or the ability to make your own decisions. What are those factors that he called hygiene factors that bring you up to neutral, that make you dissatisfied if they're not taken care of, but do not necessarily motivate you? Company policy and administration, supervision, interpersonal relationships, working conditions. For example, if you ever come into a classroom and it's so hot you can't pay attention, and so that gets in the way. But when you remove that, you come in the classroom and temperature is just right, you don't say, wow, temperature is just right here, I'm going to really study hard and pay attention. No, it just brings you to neutral. Salary or pay, hygiene factor, job status and job security. So before we buy into this completely, which makes a lot of sense, let's look at Hertzberg's actual findings from his study. So achievement, for example, was mentioned. To the right are motivators, and it was mentioned about 42% of the time, it looks like. It's things that turn people on, and only about, 8 or 9% of the time as a hygiene factor, so he classified as a motivator. The same thing for recognition, clearly on the motivator side. The work itself is a little bit closer, so you may find out that some type of work you just don't like, and that could be a hygiene factor, but sometimes it's the work itself can be a motivator. Responsibility, definitely a motivator. The chances for advancement and growth are motivators. Now let's go to the other side. Company policy administration is definitely a hygiene factor, makes you dissatisfied. Supervision, I say people quit bosses, they don't quit jobs. Interpersonal relationship is close. It can be a motivator sometimes, but more often it is a hygiene factor. Working conditions, a hygiene factor, and salary is really, really close. Now, the way I look at salary is, well, let's take an example. Let's say you're a Major League Baseball player and you have a great year and you hit 50 home runs and you're the home run king and you're already making $5 million a year. But because you were the home run king, next year you want to make $10 million. Why? Do you need $5 million more to live on? No, but you want to be recognized for the great work that you did. So I think often pay or salary is a substitute for recognition. That's the way we get recognized. So now we're going to go to a video called Influencing Motivation. Before we begin, we're going to look at a cast of characters. And your assignment, or what I want you to look for as you view this video, is what motivates each one of these characters. So after I introduce the characters, we'll stop this video, which is number 19, and then we'll you're to view video 20, which is nothing but this video because it's kind of long by itself. If I were to put it with all this other stuff. And then we'll come back in video 21, we'll discuss a little bit more of it. So here's the characters that you're going to look at. There's a guy named Jack. He is the manager. You'll see him right at the beginning in a short telephone conversation. You should be able to determine his motivations. Briefly, they'll show an intern named Deanna. She's down at the bottom. But the next person we're going to concentrate on is Parker Ryan, who's the director of special promotions. What needs or motivators does he have? You'll be able to determine that right off the bat when he's talking to a man about putting a sign on his door. Lily, a bookkeeping and billing manager. You'll see her in a red dress, and she is talking to a friend on the phone. You'll be able to figure out what motivates her pretty quickly. Greg Hofsinger, the production coordinator. Now, he's going to be the tough one to figure out what motivates him. And as you go through this video, Jack will try to use what he figures motivates each of these people to get them motivated. He'll appeal to what motivates Parker Ryan or Lily. But Greg, he has trouble figuring out. Jeff, the advertising salesman, he's easy to figure out. He even tells you what motivates him. And Deanna, who's a college student and worked as an intern, you'll be able to figure her out too. So that is the end of video 19, Motivation Part 2. A little bit shorter video, but then you're going to see a little bit longer one where you see the video Influence and Motivation for video number 20.